February 14th, 1943, Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. 4:23 a.m. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell gripped the steel hatch of her disabled Sherman tank as German 88mm shells screamed overhead, each explosion closer than the last. For 6 hours, her crew had been pinned in this narrow valley, watching American armor burn like torches against the desert dawn. She had graduated top of her class at Fort Knox, studied Rommel's tactics until she could recite them backward, believed American steel was invincible. Now, surrounded by the smoking hulls of 37 destroyed tanks, she understood the brutal truth. The Desert Fox had just taught the American army its most devastating lesson. Within 3 weeks, everything would change. A new commander would arrive, a man whose name would become synonymous with armored warfare, whose philosophy of speed, aggression, and relentless attack would transform defeat into dominance. This is the story of how General George Patton turned the North African desert into America's proving ground, how one woman tanker witnessed the birth of modern armored doctrine, and how 53 days of hell forged the most formidable fighting force the world had ever seen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell had never imagined she would command a tank. Growing up in rural Montana, she had watched her father struggle with a failing ranch, watched her mother stretch every dollar through the Depression, learned early that survival meant working twice as hard as anyone expected. When Pearl Harbor shattered America's peace on December 7, 1941, Sarah was 22 years old, working as a mechanic in Billings, the only woman in a shop of 15 men. She could strip an engine faster than most, diagnose problems by sound alone, and outwork anyone who doubted her capability. The Army needed tankers desperately, and in the chaos of mobilization, Sarah's mechanical expertise opened a door that military tradition had kept firmly locked. By March 1942, she was at Fort Knox, one of 17 women in an experimental program testing female tank commanders. The brass didn't believe women could handle combat, but they needed every qualified person they could find. Sarah didn't care about breaking barriers or making history. She wanted to fight, to prove herself, to be part of something larger than the endless Montana horizon. Fort Knox transformed her understanding of warfare. They spoke with respect, bordering on fear, about the German tank commander, a man who understood desert warfare like no one before him, who struck from unexpected directions with devastating speed, whose tactical genius had humbled the British for 2 years. By November 1942, Sarah shipped out with the 1st Armored Division as part of Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. She commanded a Sherman nicknamed Montana Queen with a crew she had trained personally, driver Jake Harrison from Tennessee, gunner Maria Gonzalez from Texas, loader Tommy Chen from California, and radio operator David Washington from Georgia. They were young, scared, and determined to prove themselves worthy of the machines they commanded. The invasion went smoothly at first. Landing at Oran, Algeria, they encountered light resistance from Vichy French forces who surrendered quickly once they understood the overwhelming American strength. The convoy moved east toward Tunisia, a massive column of tanks, trucks, artillery, and infantry stretching for miles across the desert. Sarah had never seen anything like it. The sheer scale of American logistics, the endless supplies, the mechanical precision of moving thousands of vehicles across hostile terrain. At night, the desert came alive with the sounds of maintenance, engines roaring to life for testing, welders repairing damage, mechanics working under blackout conditions to keep the machines operational. December brought the first real combat. Sarah's platoon engaged German reconnaissance units near Taborba, brief firefights that ended with the enemy retreating rapidly. The engagements felt almost anticlimactic after months of training and anticipation. Her crew performed well, loading and firing with practiced efficiency, communicating clearly despite the chaos of battle. But something felt wrong. The Germans weren't fighting seriously, weren't committing their main forces, just probing and withdrawing. Her platoon commander, Captain Robert Hayes, shared her concern during the evening briefing on December 18th. He spread maps across the hood of his Jeep, pointing to the mountains surrounding the coastal plain where American forces had concentrated. Those heights worried him. The Germans held the high ground, controlled the passes, could observe every American movement. Intelligence reports suggested Rommel was withdrawing westward from Libya, pursued by British forces under Montgomery. The plan assumed the Germans would be caught between two Allied armies, crushed by superior numbers and firepower. Hayes didn't believe it. Rommel was too smart, too experienced, too dangerous to be caught so easily. January 1943 brought confirmation of Hayes's fears. The Afrika Korps wasn't retreating in defeat, but consolidating for a counteroffensive. German forces reinforced Tunisia, bringing fresh divisions, new equipment, and a battle-hardened confidence born from 2 years of desert victories. American intelligence underestimated enemy strength, misread German intentions, and failed to recognize the danger developing in the mountain passes. Sarah spent January conducting patrols, escorting supply convoys, and learning the brutal reality of desert warfare. The heat was crushing during the day, temperatures reaching 120 degrees inside the tank's steel hull. The crew took turns manning positions, rotating to prevent heat exhaustion. Water was precious, rationed carefully, never enough to truly satisfy thirst.
Dust infiltrated everything: engines, weapons, food, clothing, lungs. Mechanical breakdowns were constant. Tracks threw shoes, engines overheated, transmissions failed under the strain of desert operations. Sarah spent more time repairing her tank than fighting in it, working alongside her crew to keep Montana Queen operational. The American supply system was magnificent but overwhelming. Convoys arrived daily with fuel, ammunition, spare parts, food, and replacements. The sheer abundance staggered Sarah, who remembered Depression-era scarcity. Here in the desert, thousands of miles from home, the Army provided everything: hot meals when possible, clean water, medical care, mail from home, even occasional entertainment. The logistics officer explained that each Sherman tank required approximately 100 gallons of gasoline for a full day's operations, several tons of ammunition for sustained combat, and continuous maintenance to remain battle-ready. Multiply that by hundreds of tanks, add trucks, artillery, aircraft, and infantry needs, and the numbers became astronomical. Yet somehow, the supplies kept flowing, the convoys kept rolling, the warehouses kept filling. This was American industrial power translated into desert warfare. The ability to project force across oceans, maintain armies in hostile territory, and overwhelm enemies through sheer material superiority. February began with ominous intelligence reports. German forces were massing near the mountain passes, particularly around Kasserine and Faid. Reconnaissance flights reported heavy tank concentrations, artillery positions, and defensive preparations, suggesting an imminent offensive. American commanders debated the reports. Some believed the Germans were preparing to retreat, building defenses to cover their withdrawal. Others, including Hayes, recognized the preparations as offensive rather than defensive. On February 12th, orders came down. Sarah's company would deploy to Kasserine Pass, reinforcing defensive positions against possible German attacks. The pass was a narrow defile through the mountains, a natural choke point where relatively small forces could hold against much larger numbers. The terrain favored defense: steep slopes, limited approaches, excellent observation from the heights. If the Germans attacked here, they would be walking into a killing ground. February 14th shattered that confidence. At 4 a.m., German artillery opened up with devastating accuracy, shells landing among American positions with precision that suggested extensive reconnaissance. Sarah woke to explosions, scrambling into Montana Queen as her crew tumbled from their sleeping bags. The radio crackled with confused reports: enemy tanks advancing, infantry attacking, positions being overrun. Hayes ordered the company forward to engage, but in the darkness and confusion, coordination broke down. Tanks advanced individually rather than as a coordinated unit, stumbling into carefully prepared German positions. The first light of dawn revealed the disaster. German Mark IV tanks occupied the heights, hold-down positions that exposed only their turrets, making them nearly impossible to hit, while giving them perfect firing positions against American armor below. The German 88mm guns, originally designed as anti-aircraft weapons but devastating against tanks, picked off Shermans with methodical precision. Sarah watched tanks explode, saw crews bail out burning, heard the screams on the radio as friends died.
Montana Queen took a glancing hit that damaged the track, immobilizing them in the valley. For 6 hours, they couldn't move, couldn't retreat, could only wait and pray that the next shell wouldn't find them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Battle of Kasserine Pass became America's baptism by fire in North Africa, a catastrophic defeat that exposed every weakness in American doctrine, training, and leadership. Over 3 days, German forces pushed through the pass, destroyed or captured hundreds of American vehicles, killed or captured thousands of soldiers, and advanced 50 miles into Allied territory. Sarah's company was decimated. Of 15 tanks that entered the battle, only 3 survived. Hayes was killed on the second day when his tank took a direct hit from an 88. Maria Gonzalez lost her left arm to shrapnel. Tommy Chen died instantly when a shell penetrated Montana Queen's turret on the morning of February 16th. David Washington suffered burns over 40% of his body. Only Sarah and Jake Harrison emerged physically unscathed, though neither would ever forget the screams, the burning, the helpless feeling of being outfought by a superior enemy. The retreat was chaos. American forces fell back in disorder, abandoning equipment, losing unit cohesion, spreading panic through rear areas. For the first time since entering the war, American soldiers faced the possibility of defeat, of being driven back into the sea, of losing North Africa entirely. The psychological impact was devastating. These men and women had believed in American invincibility, in the superiority of their equipment and training, in the inevitable triumph of democracy over fascism. Kasserine Pass destroyed those illusions. The Germans were better trained, better led, better equipped, and far more experienced. American courage and determination meant nothing against tactical skill and battlefield experience. Sarah spent February 17th helping evacuate wounded, loading burned and broken bodies into ambulances, watching men cry from pain and shock and shame. She had failed. Her crew had failed. The entire American army had failed. Montana Queen sat abandoned in the valley, too damaged to recover, another hulk among dozens marking the path of defeat. By February 22nd, the German offensive stalled. Rommel had achieved a tactical victory, but lacked the resources to exploit it strategically. British reinforcements from the east, American reinforcements from the west, and overextended German supply lines forced a withdrawal. The Germans pulled back through the passes, returning to their original positions, leaving behind shattered American units and a profound lesson about desert warfare. The battle had been a humiliation, but it could have been much worse. If Rommel had possessed more fuel, more ammunition, more time, he might have destroyed the entire American force. Instead, he had delivered a painful but survivable defeat, one that would force the Americans to learn, adapt, and improve, or face destruction in future battles. On March 6, 1943, everything changed. Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr. arrived in North Africa to assume command of 2nd Corps, the American formation shattered at Kasserine Pass. Sarah first saw him at a mass formation on March 8, when he addressed the battered survivors of the battle. He stood on the hood of his Jeep, dressed in an immaculate uniform with polished helmet, ivory-handled pistols on his hips, an American flag flying from his vehicle.
His appearance was theatrical, almost absurd, yet his presence commanded immediate attention.
When he spoke, his voice carried across the assembly with absolute authority. He told them they had been poorly led, poorly trained, and poorly prepared. He told them they were going to learn to fight, learn to win, learn to kill Germans with the same efficiency the Germans had killed Americans. He told them that defeat was temporary, that redemption was possible, that he would personally lead them to victory or die trying. Sarah had heard plenty of speeches, plenty of officers promising victory and glory. This was different. Patton wasn't promising easy success or quick triumph. He was promising suffering, discipline, and transformation through absolute commitment to excellence. The transformation began immediately. Patton implemented a comprehensive program designed to rebuild Second Corps from the ground up, addressing every weakness exposed at Kasserine. Discipline came first. He enforced regulations with fanatical intensity, proper uniforms at all times, saluting officers, maintaining equipment to exacting standards, following orders instantly and completely. Soldiers who had grown slack during the retreat found themselves facing courts-martial for infractions previously overlooked. Officers who failed to maintain standards were relieved immediately, regardless of rank or connections. Within a week, the slovenly, defeated army began looking like a professional fighting force. The physical transformation paralleled mental transformation. Soldiers who carried themselves with shame and defeat began standing straighter, moving with purpose, speaking with confidence. Patton understood that combat effectiveness began with self-respect, that soldiers who looked like winners would eventually fight like winners. Training intensified to levels that seemed almost cruel. Tank crews drilled constantly, loading and firing exercises until they could maintain sustained rates without conscious thought. Gunnery practice until they could hit targets at maximum range while moving. Coordination drills until platoons functioned as single organisms. Sarah found herself training 16 hours daily, falling into her bedroll exhausted, waking before dawn to repeat the process. Sarah absorbed these lessons during countless briefings and training exercises. Tank warfare wasn't about armor thickness or gun size, though those mattered. It was about getting to the right place faster than the enemy expected, hitting harder than they anticipated, and maintaining momentum until their positions collapsed. The Sherman's weaknesses could be overcome through superior tactics, better coordination, and absolute commitment to aggressive action. March brought increasing confidence as training paid visible dividends. Crews that had fumbled at Kasserine now executed complex maneuvers with precision. Gunnery scores improved dramatically as constant practice developed muscle memory and instinctive range estimation. Communication systems that had failed under stress now functioned smoothly as radio operators learned proper procedures and discipline. The army that had retreated in chaos was being rebuilt into a coherent fighting force capable of executing Patton's aggressive doctrine. Sarah felt the change in herself and her crew. They moved together naturally now, anticipated each other's actions, communicated through abbreviated phrases that conveyed complete tactical situations. Desert Fury became an extension of their collective will, a 30-ton weapon they wielded with growing confidence and skill. Intelligence reports throughout March indicated German forces were preparing defenses around Gafsa and El Guatar, anticipating Allied offensives aimed at linking up with British forces advancing from the east. Rommel had been recalled to Germany, replaced by General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, a competent but less inspired commander. The German position in North Africa was deteriorating. Supplies were scarce, reinforcements non-existent, Allied air superiority increasingly dominant. Yet the Africa Corps remained dangerous, still capable of punishing any force that attacked carelessly or without proper preparation. Patton planned to strike hard and fast, using Second Corps as a hammer to drive German forces against the British anvil. The offensive would test everything he had rebuilt, prove whether American forces could match German tactical skill, demonstrate whether the lessons of Kasserine had been learned or merely acknowledged. For Sarah and thousands like her, the coming battle represented a chance for redemption, an opportunity to prove that defeat had taught them how to win. March 17th,
1943, El Guettar, Tunisia. Dawn broke across the desert like a blade of fire, illuminating the largest American armored formation yet assembled in North Africa. Sarah stood in Desert Fury's turret, scanning the horizon through binoculars as 200 tanks moved into attack positions. The air smelled of diesel fuel, gun oil, and the peculiar metallic taste that comes before combat. Around her, crews performed final checks, ammunition racks filled, machine guns loaded, radios tested, engines warming to operating temperature. This was Patton's first major offensive, the moment when theory would meet reality, when months of brutal training would either justify the suffering or prove inadequate against German steel. Sarah felt no fear, only a cold determination born from watching friends die at Kasserine Pass. Today wasn't about glory or honor. Today was about proving that American tankers could fight and win against the best the Wehrmacht could offer. The radio crackled with Patton's voice, broadcast across all command frequencies. Gentlemen and ladies, today we attack. Attack violently. Attack without mercy.
Attack until the enemy breaks or we do. There is no middle ground in war, only victory or death. Make your choice and make it count. All units advance. Desert Fury's engine roared to life, and Sarah felt the familiar vibration through her boots as they rolled forward into history. The advance began with surprising ease. American artillery had pounded German positions throughout the night, and fighter bombers strafed suspected concentrations at first light. The preliminary bombardment was meant to soften defenses, disrupt communications, and demoralize defenders before the armor arrived. Sarah's company moved in a wedge formation. Tanks spread to minimize casualties from single shells, maintaining visual contact while allowing independent maneuver. The terrain was relatively flat here, offering long sight lines but little cover. If the Germans had prepared properly, this could become a killing ground like Kasserine. But intelligence suggested the enemy had concentrated forces elsewhere, expecting the main attack to come from the different direction. Patton's plan relied on speed and surprise, hitting where the Germans were weakest before they could reinforce. The first hour passed without contact. Desert Fury rolled across empty desert, crushing scrub vegetation, throwing up dust clouds that marked American progress for miles. Sarah scanned constantly, searching for the telltale flash of enemy guns, the distinctive shape of German tanks, any sign that they were moving into an ambush. Her crew maintained silence except for essential communications, each focused on their specific responsibilities, trusting Sarah's leadership after weeks of training together. At 7:43 a.m., everything changed. Patricia Sullivan spotted movement 3,000 yards ahead, German reconnaissance vehicles withdrawing rapidly toward prepared positions. Sarah ordered her platoon to pursue, accelerating to maximum speed, determined not to let the enemy escape and warn their main forces. Desert Fury topped a low rise, and suddenly the battlefield opened before them. German positions stretched across the valley floor, dozens of tanks, hull down behind earthworks, artillery batteries positioned to cover the approaches. Infantry dug into trenches that zigzagged through the defensive zone. Sarah had perhaps 15 seconds before those guns found their range. She made the only decision possible: attack straight through, relying on speed and aggression to overwhelm defenders before they could coordinate their fire. Her radio crackled with orders to her platoon. All Fury units, charge formation, maximum speed, target the artillery first. Don't stop moving. Don't give them stationary targets. Hit them hard and break through to the other side. Her second disabled a German tank, attempting to pivot its gun toward them. Her third silenced a machine gun nest that had begun raking their armor with tracer fire. Marcus Freeman loaded with desperate speed, slamming 75mm rounds into the breach as fast as Patricia could fire, maintaining a rate that seemed impossible under combat conditions. Jennifer Cole called out targets and threats, her voice steady despite the chaos, coordinating their movements with other tanks in the platoon. Carlos Rodriguez drove like a man possessed, weaving through shell craters, avoiding disabled vehicles, maintaining maximum speed even as explosions bracketed them. Sarah directed this orchestra of violence, making split-second decisions that kept them moving, fighting, surviving. They crossed the German defensive line in less than 3 minutes, bursting through to the rear areas where supply trucks and command vehicles scattered in panic. The breakthrough created chaos in German ranks. American tanks were suddenly among their support elements, shooting up ammunition dumps, scattering infantry, disrupting communications. More importantly, the penetration opened gaps in the defensive line that following American units exploited ruthlessly. Within an hour, the German position collapsed. Units that had held firm against frontal attacks found themselves surrounded, cut off from support, forced to surrender or retreat. Sarah's platoon rallied behind enemy lines, reorganizing for the next phase. They had lost 2 tanks in the initial assault, but destroyed or disabled at least 15 German vehicles. The mathematics of attrition favored America. They could replace losses overnight, while every German tank destroyed was irreplaceable. This was Patton's doctrine in action. Accept casualties, maintain momentum, and break through rather than grinding down enemy positions. The approach was costly in American lives, but devastating to German cohesion. An army could survive losses if it maintained organization, but once formation shattered and communications failed, even elite troops became ineffective. By noon, El Guitar was in American hands. The victory wasn't complete. German forces had retreated in relatively good order, preserving their core strength, but the psychological impact was profound. For the first time since entering North Africa, American armor had attacked and defeated German positions in sustained combat. Kasserine's shame began to fade, replaced by growing confidence that they could match the Wehrmacht on equal terms. Sarah sat on Desert Fury's deck during a brief halt, drinking lukewarm water from her canteen, watching smoke rise from burning vehicles across the battlefield. Patricia Sullivan had a cut on her forehead from hitting the gun sight during a violent maneuver, but she was grinning, almost giddy with the adrenaline of survival. Marcus Freeman was already performing maintenance, checking systems for damage, ensuring they were ready for the next engagement. Jennifer Cole was updating their log, documenting ammunition expenditure, mechanical issues, enemy contacts. Carlos Rodriguez had fallen asleep instantly, exhausted from hours of concentration and physical effort. They had become what Patton demanded, a professional fighting crew capable of functioning under extreme stress, executing complex tasks while people tried to kill them, maintaining effectiveness even when friends died around them. The campaign continued through late March and into April, a series of sharp engagements as American forces pushed east toward the final German strongholds around Tunis and Bizerte.
Each battle followed similar patterns. American attacks leveraging superior numbers and firepower, German defenses exploiting superior tactical skill and better positions, outcomes determined by which factor proved more decisive. Sarah participated in 11 major engagements over 6 weeks, each one reinforcing lessons learned through blood and fire. She learned that tank warfare was fundamentally about positioning, getting hauled down before the enemy, flanking rather than frontal attacks, using terrain to minimize exposure while maximizing fields of fire. She learned that crew coordination mattered more than individual skill, that 5 people functioning as one unit could defeat more talented individuals working independently. She learned that maintenance was as important as marksmanship, that a tank that couldn't move or shoot was just an expensive pillbox. Most importantly, she learned that survival required a strange combination of aggression and caution, attacking boldly to seize initiative, but never becoming reckless, taking calculated risks, but never gambling unnecessarily. April 7th brought the Battle of Station de Sened, where Sarah earned the Silver Star for actions that would become part of Second Corps legend. Her company had been tasked with capturing a critical road junction defended by elements of the German 21st Panzer Division. The position was strong. Tanks positioned behind railroad embankments, artillery covering the approaches, infantry with anti-tank weapons dug into surrounding hills. The initial American assault stalled under heavy fire, losing 6 tanks in 15 minutes without making significant progress. The attack was collapsing, units pulling back in disorder when Sarah recognized an opportunity. The German positions focused on the main road, but reconnaissance photos showed a secondary track running through a wadi, a dry riverbed that approached the junction from an unexpected angle. The track was rough, possibly impassable for tanks, but it offered a chance to flank the German position if they could navigate it successfully. Sarah radioed her company commander with the plan. He authorized her to try with her platoon while the main force maintained pressure frontally, keeping German attention focused on the obvious threat. Desert Fury led 4 other Shermans into the wadi, disappearing below the desert floor into a landscape of eroded channels and rocky outcrops. Navigation was nightmarish. Carlos Rodriguez had to ford soft sand patches that threatened to bog them down, climb steep banks that tested the Sherman's power, squeeze through narrow sections where rock walls scraped both sides of the hull. Twice they had to backtrack and find alternate routes when the way forward proved impassable. The journey that looked like 3 miles on the map took 90 minutes of grinding, sweating effort. But they emerged exactly where Sarah had hoped, behind and to the left of the German defensive line with clear shots at enemy tanks focused on the American frontal assault. Patricia Sullivan's first round caught a German Mark IV from the side, penetrating its thinner armor and causing a catastrophic ammunition explosion. Her second disabled the command tank, eliminating German coordination. Her third, fourth, and fifth rounds found targets as fast as Marcus could load, systematically destroying the German position from an angle they had never anticipated. The other tanks in Sarah's platoon joined the carnage, pouring fire into the exposed enemy.
Within 5 minutes, the German defense collapsed. Crews abandoned their vehicles. Infantry surrendered or fled. Artillery fell silent as gunners realized they were about to be overrun. The frontal American assault surged forward immediately, exploiting the chaos Sarah had created. The road junction fell with minimal additional casualties, a significant victory achieved through tactical innovation rather than brute force. Patton himself visited Sarah's position the next day, presenting her with the Silver Star in a brief ceremony that felt surreal in its formality amid the wreckage of battle. He told her she exemplified the aggressive spirit he demanded, that her actions proved American tankers could outthink as well as outfight the Germans. The recognition meant less to Sarah than the knowledge that her crew had survived, that her decision had saved American lives by ending the battle quickly. Patricia, Marcus, Jennifer, and Carlos were her family now, bound by shared danger and mutual dependence. Every decision she made affected their survival. Every risk she took gambled with their lives. The responsibility was crushing, but it also gave purpose to the chaos, a reason to be excellent beyond personal survival. May 1943 brought the final collapse of Axis forces in North Africa. British, American, and French forces converged on Tunis and Bizerte from multiple directions, compressing German and Italian units into an ever-shrinking perimeter. The Luftwaffe had been driven from the skies, making daylight movements suicidal for Axis forces. Supply ships attempting to cross from Italy faced Allied air and naval attacks that sent most to the bottom. The Afrika Korps, once the Wehrmacht's elite formation, was reduced to burning vehicles for fuel and rationing ammunition. Yet they fought with desperate skill, making the Allies pay for every mile, every town, every hill. Sarah's company participated in the final push toward Bizerte, grinding through defensive positions that grew stronger as they approached the port. The Germans knew they were doomed, that no reinforcements would come, that surrender or death were the only remaining options. But they fought anyway, out of duty or fear or simple refusal to quit. Sarah understood that dedication even as she killed them. These were professional soldiers doing their jobs under impossible circumstances, deserving respect even in defeat. May 9, 1943 marked the official end of the North African campaign. Over 275,000 Axis soldiers surrendered, the largest capitulation of German forces to that point in the war. The victory was complete, strategic, and costly. Thousands of Allied casualties, hundreds of tanks destroyed, months of brutal combat in harsh conditions. For Sarah and the survivors of Kasserine Pass, the triumph was particularly sweet. They had been beaten, humiliated, forced to retreat in shame. Under Patton's leadership, they had rebuilt themselves into victorious warriors, transforming defeat into dominance through discipline, training, and absolute commitment to excellence.
The journey from February's disaster to May's victory represented the arc of American military power. Slow to mobilize, prone to early mistakes, but ultimately unstoppable once fully committed and properly led. Sarah stood on Bizerta's docks on May 10th, watching German prisoners file onto ships for transport to POW camps. These were the men who had seemed invincible at Kasserine, who made American armor burn like torches, who had taught brutal lessons about the difference between training and combat. Now they were beaten, exhausted, defeated by the same forces they had humiliated 3 months earlier.
The statistics told the story of transformation. In February, American tank crews averaged 4.2 rounds fired per kill, indicating poor gunnery and tactical positioning. By May, that number had improved to 2.1 rounds per kill, approaching German efficiency. American tank losses in February exceeded 3-to-1 against German forces. By May, the ratio had reversed, with American crews destroying German tanks at favorable exchange rates. Mechanical reliability improved dramatically as crews learned proper maintenance procedures and logistics systems matured. Desert Fury had been Sarah's third Sherman. The first 2 were destroyed at Kasserine and El Guitar. But this one had survived through 6 weeks of sustained combat without major mechanical failures, a testament to her crew's dedication to maintenance and the resilience of American engineering. The Sherman wasn't superior to German tanks in armor or firepower, but it was reliable, easily repaired, and produced in overwhelming numbers. America could afford to lose 2 Shermans for every German tank destroyed, because factories in Detroit churned out replacements faster than battles could consume them. This industrial reality, more than tactical brilliance or individual courage, ultimately determined the war's outcome. Patton's impact on 2 corps transcended tactics and training. He had transformed a defeated organization's fundamental psychology, replacing shame with pride, fear with aggression, chaos with discipline. His methods were often harsh, his demands unreasonable, his personality abrasive. But he understood that armies reflect their commanders, that soldiers perform to the standards their leaders enforce, that excellence requires uncompromising commitment. Sarah had hated him initially, resented his rigid discipline and theatrical personality, questioned whether his methods would translate to battlefield success. Experience proved his wisdom. Every regulation he enforced, every standard he demanded, every hour of training he required contributed to their survival and effectiveness in combat. The army that retreated from Kasserine had been unprepared, poorly led, and inadequately trained. The army that conquered Bizerte was professional, confident, and lethally effective. Patton made that transformation possible through force of will and absolute refusal to accept anything less than excellence. The human cost of that transformation was substantial. Sarah's original crew from Kasserine, Tommy Chin killed, David Washington badly burned, Maria Gonzalez crippled, represented thousands of casualties incurred during the learning process. Every lesson learned had been written in American blood. Every tactical improvement purchased with destroyed tanks and dead crews. The memorial cemetery outside Tunis held rows of white crosses marking American graves. Young men and women who came to North Africa believing in easy victory and died discovering that war against professional soldiers was brutally difficult. Sarah visited the cemetery on May 15th, walking among the crosses until she found Tommy Chin's grave. She hadn't known him well. They had trained together for only 6 weeks before Kasserine, but he had died in her tank, under her command, during her first real battle. The guilt never completely faded, the nagging question of whether she could have done something different, positioned better, recognized the danger sooner.
Survivor's guilt was common among tankers. The psychological burden of living while crew members died, of making decisions that saved some lives by sacrificing others. Patricia Sullivan found Sarah at the cemetery, sitting beside Tommy's grave in silence. Patricia didn't say anything, just sat down next to her commander and waited. After long minutes, Sarah spoke. "I keep thinking about that moment at Kasserine when the shell came through the turret. Tommy was loading, reaching for another round. He never saw it coming. Never had a chance to be scared or pray or say goodbye. Just gone, instantly, while the rest of us survived. Patricia nodded slowly. I think about it too, but we can't change what happened. We can only make sure his death meant something, that we learned from it, that we became good enough to honor his sacrifice by surviving. You've kept the rest of us alive through 11 battles, Sarah. That counts for something. That counts for everything. The conversation helped, though it didn't erase the guilt or grief. War created wounds that never fully healed, memories that surfaced unexpectedly years later, dreams filled with burning tanks and screaming friends. Sarah understood now why veterans rarely spoke about combat, why they formed tight associations and avoided civilians who couldn't understand. The experiences were too intense, too personal, too terrible to share with people who hadn't lived through similar horrors. June brought new orders and new challenges. Second Corps would participate in Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, scheduled for early July. The campaign would test whether lessons learned in North Africa translated to different terrain and conditions. Sicily's mountains and narrow roads would favor defenders, making the mobile tank warfare of the desert impossible. Infantry would bear more of the burden, with armor providing support rather than leading assaults. Sarah welcomed the change, hoping that reduced tank operations might mean fewer casualties, though experience suggested that war always found ways to kill, regardless of terrain or tactics. Her crew had survived North Africa through skill, discipline, and considerable luck. Sicily would test whether that luck held or finally ran out. But that was a concern for tomorrow. Today, they were alive, victorious, and fundamentally transformed by their experiences. The frightened, defeated survivors of Kasserine Pass had become Patton's armored spearhead, proof that American forces could learn, adapt, and triumph even against the Wehrmacht's best divisions. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.